I caught my gardener staring. So I let him do it. It wasn't the first time I caught him watching me. But this time, I didn't pretend I didn't notice. I locked eyes with him. I walked slower. Bent down lower. I gave him a show, and he didn't even blink. My name is Claire. I'm married. I live in a beautiful home. And I let my gardener undress me with his eyes, every morning. Why? Because my husband stopped looking at me a long time ago. I never planned to let it go further. But the day I leaned over the railing and saw him staring like he owned me, I didn't stop him. I opened the door. And I let him come in. My name is Claire. I used to think marriage meant security. Comfort. But after 8 years, what I felt most was invisible. Ethan, my husband, is a partner at a law firm, present in the house, but never with me. He brings home expensive wine and long silences. We stopped kissing like we meant it. We stopped touching like we missed each other. I was a trophy wife in a museum of cold perfection. Then came Marco. The gardener. Quiet. Always working with focus, sweat dripping down his chest, shirt clinging to him like it didn't want to let go. The first time I caught him staring, I pretended not to see. The second time, I paused longer in the doorway. The third time, I smiled. He looked away, flustered. But the damage was done. I started finding reasons to be outside when he was around. Bringing him cold drinks. Asking questions I didn't need answers to. Sometimes he didn't even look at me, but I felt him. And when Ethan would cancel dinner, or leave me sitting alone in the living room, I'd imagine Marco's hands where Ethan's used to be. I hated myself for it. And yet, I couldn't stop. One afternoon, I walked outside in a silk robe. No bra. I told myself it was hot. That it was innocent. Marco froze when he saw me. His eyes darted from my chest to my lips to my legs. I stood there longer than I should have. Do you need anything, Mrs. Claire? He asked, his voice low. I smiled. Not yet. I turned, and left the door cracked open. That evening, I kept reliving it in my head. The stare. The stillness. The way Marco's voice trembled when he said my name. I felt it between my legs when I closed my eyes in the shower, not Ethan's hands, but Marco's. I wrapped my robe tighter that night. Not because I was cold, but because I was burning. The next morning, I made fresh lemonade, his favorite, I'd learned. I brought it to him in the garden, watching the way his eyes refused to rise above my collarbone. And when he reached for the glass, my fingers brushed his. Not by accident. His breath caught. So did mine. Thank you, he whispered. I didn't say anything. I just smiled, and walked back inside, door left open again. He came to the back patio to return the glass. But he didn't leave. He lingered. I turned around and he was just standing there, staring at me. Is something wrong? I asked, barely above a whisper. You know it is, he said. His voice was deeper than usual. Rough. Hungry. My heart raced. I took one slow step toward him. He didn't move. I reached for the glass in his hand, but his fingers stayed wrapped around it. Then, he touched me. Lightly. Fingertips on my wrist. Like he was asking. Like he was waiting for me to say no. I didn't. Instead, I stepped closer. And I let the glass drop. His lips were on mine before the glass even hit the ground. Rough. Desperate. I moaned into his mouth and grabbed the back of his neck like I'd been starving. I pressed into him, feeling the heat of his chest through his shirt, the sweat on his skin, the rawness of his breath. We kissed like it was the first time either of us had felt alive in years. And when I pulled away, both of us were trembling. He looked at me like I was holy. I looked at him like he was forbidden fruit I'd just taken a bite of. And then, I ran. Back inside. Heart pounding. Hands shaking. Guilt flooding in. That night, Ethan came home drunk again. He didn't even notice the broken glass I'd left outside. He didn't ask about my day. Didn't kiss me. Didn't even look at me. He passed out in his suit. And I lay beside him, eyes wide open, reliving that kiss over and over. Fingers grazing my lips. Body aching with want. Mind screaming with guilt. But that kiss had brought me back to life. I avoided him for days. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew if I saw him again, I wouldn't stop. But even with him gone from my sight, he was everywhere in my mind. His hands. His breath. His mouth. I'd stand at the sink, staring out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. And then one afternoon, he came back. Not for the lawn. But for me. He stood outside the kitchen doors, holding nothing, eyes locked on mine. He didn't move. Didn't blink. And I didn't look away. I opened the door. We didn't speak. He stepped in. I stepped back. And just like that, it happened. Clothes on the floor. Breathless whispers. My body against the wall, his mouth on my skin. It wasn't soft. It wasn't sweet. It was years of neglect, desire, and defiance exploding into something carnal. I let him touch every part of me Ethan had forgotten. I moaned his name like I didn't care who heard. And when it was over, I laid there in his arms, silent. Because I knew what I'd done. And I knew I wasn't done doing it again. The next week was a blur of stolen moments. Quick touches in the hallway. Secret kisses behind the guest house. Whispers that made my knees weak. He started coming earlier, staying longer. And I made excuses, groceries, yoga, solo walks, just to be alone when he came. I told myself it was just physical. But the way he held me, the way he looked at me. No man ever looked at me like that. Not even Ethan in our best years. I was falling. And I was falling hard. Then, one night, Ethan came home early. Unannounced. Unusual. I was fresh out of the shower. Marco was still in the backyard, cleaning up tools. And Ethan? He stood in the kitchen, looking at me with narrowed eyes. "You've been smiling lately," he said flatly. I froze. "What does that mean?" He shrugged. "It means I know you. And I know when you're hiding something." My throat went dry. For the first time, I felt fear. Not of getting caught. But of choosing. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I pulled Marco aside the next day. "We need to stop." His face dropped. "Why?" "Because I can't lie to myself anymore." "Are you lying when you say you want me?" I looked at him, heart pounding. "No. I'm lying when I say it doesn't mean anything." He reached for me, and I let him. We kissed one last time. And I made a promise. One I wasn't sure I could keep. The next morning, Ethan found a note on the fridge. "Gone to see my mother." It was a lie. I was in the guest house. Naked. Waiting. Marco came. Of course he did. And we didn't talk. We just finished what we'd started. Again. And again. And this time I didn't feel guilty. I felt owned. Seen. Loved. And when I walked back into my house, hair tangled, body sore, Ethan was standing there. At the top of the stairs. Holding Marco's glove. He didn't scream. Didn't cry. He just stared at me with a hollow expression. "I was going to surprise you with a trip," he said. "But I guess someone already did." I tried to speak. He raised a hand. "I don't want the details." And then he walked out. Not just out of the room. Out of our marriage. It's been 3 months. I haven't seen Ethan. I haven't seen Marco either. He left after that day. Didn't even say goodbye. I stare at the garden sometimes, remembering the way he looked at me. The way I let him. And even now, I still don't know if I regret it.